So today I'm going to be talking to you about the Israel-Palestine conflict, which has been weighing very heavily on my mind, and I am going to try and put that within the context of our class. So in order to contextualize it, I asked the question, are animal studies applicable at this particular point of crisis in the Israel-Palestine conflict? And to answer that question, I'm going to look at two separate instances. One is a top-down situation where a member of the Israeli government made kind of a very brazen statement about Hamas that seems to have been extended to Palestinian citizens at large. And then I'm going to look at a bottom-up case study of a particular Palestinian man and his reaction to the violence that he has been seeing. So first, I'm going to get into that top-down example where I talk about the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who is the defense minister of Israel, and he endorsed a full siege on Gaza, claiming that, quote, "We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." And this was a statement he made on October 9th, just 2 days after Hamas laid siege to Israel and kidnapped and harmed some Israeli citizens. I believe killed. I don't want to minimize the harm. This statement nonetheless brings to mind a lot of different notions of power, and so I'm going to dissect that using our readings. First, obviously, Cudworth comes to mind, who talks a lot about the animalization of humans. They have this historical example of human Jewish people in particular being called rats or lice by the Nazi Party during the Holocaust. And I do want to break that apart just a little bit more because while I in no way want to equate the Nazi Party to the Israeli government, I believe that's an inherently anti-Semitic comparison to make. There is something here about the notion of the cycle of violence and oppression that seems to be going on. So Paulo Freire has this quote, the oppressed are at one and the same time themselves and the oppressor whose consciousness they have internalized. So in the scope of this crisis, I am interpreting the internalization as being the animalization of people with whom you are in conflict. And I think that the oppressor of Jewish people, the Nazis, kind of allowed or set some sort of precedent for this notion to be implanted into the consciousness of those at the charge of the Israeli state. Borelli, who I cite specifically here, kind of pulls this out and talks about that cycle of violence and oppression whereby the oppressed becomes the oppressor, and I think that this is a perfect example of that situation coming to head here. Additionally, from Cudworth, we have the notion of the legitimization of killing of animalized humans. This occurs because it's so legitimate to kill animals by the state that it's codified into law. And so when you equate humans to animals, you treat them as beasts that are below the law, and thus legitimize the killing of other human beings, which obviously seems to be the goal of the defense minister in this particular situation. So that sets us up to kind of talk about the way power dynamics are at play here. And I believe that Israel is wielding sovereign power over the state of Palestine. They do this in a magnitude, or they do this through killing people, because Foucault identifies sovereign power as the right to kill. And I think the magnitude of deaths, Palestinian deaths in particular, is comparable to the culling of different animals. And that kind of relates to Taylor's notion of sovereign power in farms. And while obviously people in Gaza are not on farms at this point, it's just the comparison of the way that sovereign power is being wielded here. Another comparison of the way that sovereign power is being wielded, I believe, is the notion of, quote, pleasure for the victors. And I think in a lot of ways, Israel is already the victor, as they have settled the land formerly known as Palestine, and they have control over Palestinian land and people. This is how they shut down food, water, electricity, and internet access in Gaza, which is the full assault that the defense minister is kind of implying they were going to mobilize here, which they did, and it has cost a lot of lives. So I believe that they are not necessarily killing for their pleasure, but killing for their safety and as an extension of the legitimization of Israel as a state. And that is, again, a use of sovereign power. Finally, we know that power is being used here because Palestinians are obviously resisting oppression. Hamas, which I do not endorse in any way, and I think has caused an undue amount of suffering to Israeli and Palestinian citizens. Nonetheless, they do appear to be a form of resistance to oppression, and it's a very extreme form of resistance, but I do believe it's an expression of resistance nonetheless. So switching gears kind of dramatically here, I'm going to be looking at a particular case study that I found on Twitter of a Palestinian medic bringing a cat in to seek medical aid. I believe he brings the cat into a hospital, and he's saying something along the lines in this video, which I unfortunately can't play, so this is just a screenshot of it, of he's not dead, but he needs medical attention. And so this instance, I think, has a lot that we can unpack here, so I'm going to start kind of simply with Rollins, and I'm going to make some assumptions along the way, but I do think they're applicable. So one, I think that this medic likely sees the cat as intrinsically valuable, or he would not go to such great lengths to save it. You might know that medicine and other forms of life-saving treatment are very scarce in Gaza at the moment. A lot of hospitals have been bombed, and so his decision to bring the cat here and seek medical aid, to me, seems to signify that the cat, or he believes the cat's life is valuable as it stands without any instrumental intervention, and that the cat should be treated as other humans. This kind of nicely ties into Blowen and the different perspectives on animals. I think that in this case, instead of him seeking medical treatment for the cat, had he had the dominionistic perspective, he just would have left the cat on the side of the road, or maybe even brought it in to be euthanized, but instead he's seeking medical treatment for the cat. I also believe that instead of it being an expression of the humanistic perspective, this is an expression of the protectionistic perspective, because in my searching, I couldn't find anything tying this man or the other medic examining the cat to their pets, and so I think this man just found a cat and wanted to get it help, which is in line with the protectionistic rather than the humanistic perspective. So next, kind of shifting gears a little bit again, I'm going to talk about Nick Taylor in their discussion of the continuum of violence and its application to animal studies. And here, I think it's rather than the continuum of violence, there's kind of this notion of the continuum of empathy, and this is where a lot of my speculation kind of like broadens. So I asked myself, does the opposite of the continuum of violence exist, whereby this man is displaying such empathy for the animal that it means that maybe not only he, but Palestinian people at large express empathy at greater scales. And so it starts small with saving the life of this cat, but it might expand to more humanitarian or just general life-preserving attitudes. And that's a very broad generalization to make, but that was kind of what I was wondering, is like, does the continuum of violence work the other way? Finally, in order to have this perspective that the cat is worthwhile or worthy of alleviating suffering at all, I'm going to use Atkinson and talk about how this man seems to be utilizing animal standpoint theory, which considers not only the way that human beings define themselves and relate to other sentient species and to the natural world as a whole, but also to the perspective of animals. So this man obviously does not want the animal to suffer. He wants it to heal. And in order to have this perspective, he must have a modicum of empathy for the cat. And I believe that this is an expression of animal standpoint theory where you can understand the perspective of the cat and want it to get better. And again, as even more speculation, I think maybe the context of the war and conflict has caused him to relate to animals in a new way, where he sees them as suffering together. So I believe that, very quickly, my analysis of both the top-down and the bottom-up instances of animal studies show that they are, in fact, applicable at this particular point of crisis. thank you so much for listening and letting me vent, and I hope that the connection I made is clear, even if I had to kind of quickly sum it up at the end.